Hey there, so I wanted to do a quick book review of a book that I recently read in preparation for interviewing Grandmaster Andy Soltis. It's Deadline Grandmaster, a memoir that came out in 2024, and I just got around to it this year, and it's fantastic. So that's the main reason I'm making this video, is just to let people know about. I know people are always asking me for chess bedtime reading, books that have some chess in it, but tell a story. And this book definitely fits that category. It's filled with Soltis retraces his life, his chess career, but also has his games and talks about his life decisions. And I greatly enjoyed it. So to me, there are three major themes that come across in Deadline Grandmaster. By the way, the title is based on the fact that Grandmaster Andy Soltis was a nighttime editor for the New York Post newspaper. So he often was working on Deadline. So the three major themes of this book are, number one, to me, it's like a meditation on the pros and cons of pursuing chess professionally. In the book, Andy writes about how chess has had these mini economic waves, comings and goings throughout the years. He lived through the Fischer boom, of course, and saw the rise of Fischer, and now there's been the Queen's Gambit boom. But it's been very tumultuous throughout, and I think Andy is kind of wrestling with his decision to never pursue chess professionally. So it's kind of like a meditation on the road not taken, to reference the famous Robert Frost poem. And Andy tells all kinds of stories about his contemporaries. You know, there's allegations of match fixing, which I certainly saw some of just as a kid growing up, you know, in the 1980s and 90s. Andy doesn't name names all the time, but he talks about grandmasters fixing matches and ones who became pretty down on their luck. He contrasts it with grandmasters like Michael Wilder, who was a U.S. champion and a grandmaster who quit chess entirely and became a successful corporate lawyer. Of course, Michael Steen, famed author in Korchnoi and became an accountant. I mean, there's tons of stories of very, very distinguished players from that era moving on to do other things. And Andy kind of, because he lived in New York, which New York is like a major character in this book for sure, along with all the places he traveled. Because he lived in New York, Andy was able to stay involved in chess, and because he's such a prolific writer, and because he even wrote a chess column for the New York Post, he stayed quite involved in chess while some others quit. But I think he still is grappling with his decision to never pursue chess professionally, which he does not regret, by the way, but still interesting to hear his perspective. It also just traces his career more broadly, from a little bit about growing up, but then more when he comes to college and eventually gets a job at the New York Post. His wife is a chess player. He met his wife through chess. And even that job had lots of ups and downs. Obviously, it's the media industry, lots of acquisitions and scary moments in terms of job security. So even that part of his life story has its fair share of drama. And number three is it just has some amazing stories. So in my recent interview with Grandmaster Andy Soltis, I asked him about some of them. You know, I asked him about what it was like to play a young Viswanathan Anand, who he played when he was just 16 years old and just playing incredibly fast. Andy was pen pals with legendary author Irving Chernev. He writes about exchanging letters with him. Soltis is a great writer, so it's very readable. And there, like I said, there are funny stories throughout. So I want to show you a quick example. This is on page 168, and it's in reference to a U.S. championship game between Walter Browne and Grandmaster Larry Christensen. Walter Browne, of course, being sort of a famously irascible, very strong, time trouble addicted chess player, and Larry Christensen, just an American legend without without as many personality quirks, I guess you could say. So in this position, Walter Browne is playing white, and it's white to move and win. You can pause your video if you want, but spoiler alert, there's really three different answers, so that's not the main point of this story. But you can pause if you want, and then I'll keep it moving. So what happened in this game is Walter Browne played bishop g7 check, which is one of the moves approved by modern engines, and he went on to win the game. So it's a nice tactic. After king takes, you bring in this knight to check. The king's getting busted wide open. The queen comes in. Now you're threatening me on h7. So black has to give up all this material. And, you know, you've got a queen. You eventually take the bishop. Okay, and you've got a queen and a rook against two rooks and a knight, and black has a couple extra pawns, but his king is exposed and his position is horrible. So white's totally winning, and white did go on to win. Now, in Soltis's annotations at the time for the New York Post, he pointed out that the move knight f5 would have been a cleaner win, and Walter Browne was incensed. So in the book, he quotes Larry Christensen telling him that if white had played knight f5 here, he would have just resigned on the spot. And by the way, knight to h5 wins as well, just for posterity. And I'll put a link to a Lichess study with the game. You can analyze the game on your own if you want. But the point of the story is that after knight f5, Walter Browne was incensed because he didn't think that this move won. So he wrote a letter to the New York Post editor threatening to sue them, saying it was slander that this was written. I'll read you a quote from the book. The quote says, Walter wrote, "He not only put me in a bad light, but also completely misanalyzing, stating I missed the brilliancy when in fact the game was brilliant. I believe Andrew Soltis wrote this with malice and repression. I've spoken to a lawyer who informed me that if you're willing to print a retraction, I'll be satisfied, although irreplaceable slander has been committed." Soltis eventually managed to placate him without getting sued, but I just thought it was a funny story. And just to tie a bow on the actual position, so after knight f5, it does in fact win. Browne, and again, this is all pre-engine, this stuff is tough. Browne thought that bishop f8 saved the day, but actually white can take. Oh, and by the way, there's some other cool variations. First of all, if they take the knight, we take the pawn, and we're going to be mating on f7. And if they take the queen, it's just checkmate. So, but bishop f8, Walter at the time thought saved the day, but after takes, white has queen h4, threatening mate on h7. Black's only way to stop it is to play h5, and now the queen still slithers in with queen to g5, and checkmate is unstoppable. So knight f5 was a bit of a faster win, but anyway, mainly the story just amused me. And there's other little nuggets in this book. One story that struck me that I'd never heard before was famously in 1975, there was this Fischer-Karpov Second World Championship when Fischer ended up abdicating his title because he couldn't agree on conditions to defend his title against Karpov. Well, in the negotiations for that, there was a lot of discussion of it taking place in the Philippines, and they got pretty close to there being a match. But it turned out that when the match fell through, the money that was going to go to pay for the Fischer-Karpov match actually went to pay for the Thrilla in Manila, one of the most famous boxing matches of all time, Ali Frazier match in 1975. So I didn't know that there was a chess connection to that match, and there's all kinds of little stories throughout Soltis's book. So highly recommend it. If you're into like the old school chess stories and reading about these old time characters and thinking about decisions of how seriously to pursue chess, even if you're an amateur, these questions have resonance, although certainly more so for a chess Hall of Famer like Grandmaster Andy Soltis. So my only quibble with Deadline Grandmaster is I could not find an ebook. The publisher McFarland does not put them in Kindle format, and it's not on Forward Chess. So there is a lot of chess analysis in the book. There's a diagram on nearly every page and a lot of beautiful old school photos and stuff. But unfortunately, you'll need to get the great but expensive book, as far as I know, if you would like to read Deadline Grandmaster, which I recommend that you do. And if you want to hear more about it, again, you can watch my most recent interview with Grandmaster Andy Soltis. All right. Thanks for watching. Back to making podcasts.